Welcome everyone. I declare this meeting of the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome the members of the public. It's great to see you, who are here tonight and who are watching us online. I'm Dick Gross, I'm the Deputy Mayor, and I'm sitting in for Mayor Voss, who's absent tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging, and we acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. Council has a local law which determines how this meeting will be conducted, and we're all bound by that. There is time allotted in tonight's meeting for public question time, and during public question time, members of the public can ask specific questions on general matters other than those relating to a topic that we're discussing tonight. Members of the public are to only ask a specific question and shall not provide any statements or contextual comments relating to that question, although that is often observed in the breach. Consequently, the official minutes of the meeting will only record the question asked and any response given. The number of questions that a member of the public may ask are at the discretion of the chairperson. Now, in addition to asking questions at the specific question time, there's also the opportunity for members of the public to ask a question or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda. And this will be the first thing for each agenda item. The first cab off the rank will be the contribution from members of the community. We encourage questions or comments from the public that are directed through the Mayor or Deputy Mayor, not defamatory, abusive or objectionable in language or substance, rather are represented in the spirit of mutual respect of Council and the community. And we ask all speakers to abide by the direction of the Chair. Now, if you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside, which I'm sure you've all done. Now, I encourage you to limit your questions to around 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. It doesn't matter if you really agree with it, there is no need to repeat that point. Please note that all of the council meetings are now being live streamed. Live streaming and recording allows the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time, dedicated members of the community, providing greater access to council decision making and hopefully improving our transparency. This live streaming of the meeting is available on the council's website, and a recording of this meeting will also be available a few days after the meeting on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Now, the cameras will film and record councillors at this meeting. However, care is taken not to film or record images of members of the public. So some of you will be relieved and some of you will be disappointed. But it's only to capture us. Please also note, in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the Mayor or Deputy Mayor. In the unlikely event that of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the Chief Warden, Rebecca, who will don her cap and lead us to safety. So, first one is apologies. Councillor Simic.
Councillor Voss is an apology tonight, and I believe that Councillor Marcus Pearl is arriving a little bit late.
And can I include Councillor David Brand in that?
Yes, of course.
Fantastic. So you're moving those apologies. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Baxter. Speakers against, all those in favour, declare it carried. Minutes of the previous meetings. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 1st of August have been circulated. Are there any questions regarding these minutes? And if not, can I have a motion to confirm these minutes? Moved Councillor Bond, seconded Councillor Baxter. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Carried. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? No. Petitions and joint letters. Councillors, we have one petition on tonight's agenda. This is a response to a petition to fence Gasworks Park on the Richardson Street and Pickles Street sides. We don't have any members of the public to speak on this. So I just wondered, councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Would someone like to move this or something different? Questions? Yes, Councillor Bond.
There we go, try that one. When the original petitioners came to us, they mentioned either a fence or some other type barrier such as plantings or shrubbery to act as a barrier to dogs running out of the park and onto the road. The response here talks about how we won't fence off Gasworks, and I don't think that was ever going to occur. But did we investigate any other sort of barriers, such as trees or plantings or shrubbery, as a deterrent to dogs running onto the road?
Through you, Acting Mayor. We haven't done any investigation at the moment for either installing a fence or the use of shrubs or trees. The recommendation is saying that we would consider that when we're looking at the current master plan for Gasworks. So there's a process in place at the moment that's looking at how we manage the contamination there. As part of that, there will be some recommendations to what we need to do at the park. This can be included in that, and that could include looking at the use of things like planting.
Thanks very much. Can I ask a question? Do we have any evidence about how many dogs have actually been killed or injured escaping from the park, or is that just a matter of folklore and mythology?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I would need to take that question on notice. I had asked for that information and it hasn't been provided, so I'd need to check whether that meant the answer to that was zero, or so I'll take that question on notice.
Thanks very much. Councillors, any further questions? Can we move to the resolution? Moving the officer's recommendation. Councillor Bond, seconded Councillor Copsey. Speakers against? Does anyone wish to speak? I'll move straight to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. Sealing schedule, agenda item 5. Councillors, we've got no documents that require sealing. 6, public question time. We've got no public questions, so we'll move on to 7, which is councillor questions time. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers? We've done public question time. There was no members of the public who wish to ask a question. Councillors, I sense a dry well there. Let's now move on to 8 to 14, presentation of reports. Councillors, pursuant to Councillors' Meetings Procedure Local Law, the CEO has requested and the Mayor has given consent to the adding of a late agenda item to the meeting tonight relating to an extension of the appointment for independent members of the South Melbourne Market Committee. So this item will be considered at the end of reports listed on the agenda. Additionally, I advise that report 9.3, Northport Oval upgrade and funding agreement will not be considered at tonight's meeting and will be included on the agenda for the council meeting on the 5th of September. So the first item is 9.1, 46 to 58 Marlborough Street, Balaclava. We have 5 people who've requested to speak. Can I ask you to, when I call your name, to go into what I colloquially refer to as the seat of truth, which is there. Press the button which lights up this red light here, and you've got 3 minutes. So the first person on my list is Amanda Gilbert. Ms. Gilbert, can I ask you to just say your name and suburb for the record?
Yes, my name's Amanda Gilbert, and Balaclava is the suburb. Okay. Oh, sorry. My name's Amanda Gilbert, and the suburb is Balaclava. I should say that I have no objection to community housing. However, the concern that I have is the size and scope of the possible development, and I would just like to record that with the councillors here, that loss of car parking, and but most importantly is how big. So is there going to be some provision that a sale will be agreed to based on a particular size, particularly in height, width and so on, and design so that it's in keeping with the uniqueness of the street and the area?
Thanks very much, Ms. Gilbert. I should have said at the outset that there's been quite some community discussion about planning issues, the size and scale of the building and issues of mass and such like, and density. These issues are not being considered tonight. There's going to be a completely separate process, and if the officer's recommendation is examined, it says that it's subject to planning approval. So there's going to be a whole other conversation and debate about planning, and everyone around this table has a completely open mind on planning, and no decisions have been made about that. But yes, I've seen those flyers, and I think that planning's clearly, by law, a consideration. It has to be discussed, but it's not going to be decided tonight.
So can I just to clarify, would it be true to say that if council is not satisfied with the plans that are put forward by the successful purchaser or the housing association or whoever it is, that then the proposed development would be reconsidered for another use?
Subject to VCAT appeal rights. So yep. I'm looking to the officers to make sure I've got this right, but my understanding is that we're not talking about planning. Planning will be discussed. Everyone's got an open mind about planning, and any planning decision will be always subject to what VCAT says as a supervisory jurisdiction of this council, and we're happy to hear your objections on planning, but they're sort of not relevant to tonight's decision.
No problems. Anyway, you've heard where
but
I'm
the
coming
other,
from.
The other things, some of the other things you mentioned, like car parking, etc., they're planning matters.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Would you like me to press the green button off or keep it on?
I think we've got more. You can leave it on.
We'll leave it on. I think we've got a few more people coming now.
Thank you.
Sorry, I should have asked Paul Delaney to come down first. Is Paul here? Thanks. Okay.
Deputy Mayor, may I submit some documents?
That'd be fantastic. Once again, I do start with the caveat that planning's not strictly relevant or at all relevant to tonight's decision, but I'm delighted to receive these documents and thank you for them.
I'm not here to talk about town planning tonight. I'm here to talk about process.
Sure.
My interest in the Marlborough Street community housing is through family members. Christine and Andrew, who live in Marlborough Street, they're here tonight. And Christine and Andrew asked for my advice on the process. Now, my understanding is Council's meeting tonight is to see whether they can make a decision to move forward and give off the land. And then if that is then decided, the next step, it will move to possibly the most prominent submission, entering into a town planning phase. That's my understanding. But for the step tonight, which is the decision to give off the land, the previous process has to have been met. So we'll call tonight step 2. I'm calling to question step 1. Okay. Now, there's been a submission, I think it's Housing First, submission for, I think it's 48 apartments for a 6-storey building. And what has been submitted are plans, cross-sections and shadow diagrams. Now, my understanding of the first step, before we get to tonight's step, is that Council has to have a reasonable understanding conceptually of the submission. There is no requirements to have drawings, but they must have a reasonable conceptual understanding. And I don't believe that they have a reasonable conceptual understanding. Plans and sections have been submitted. One of the major considerations is to see impact on neighbourhood. Whilst the drawings indicate clearly, quite precisely, 48, I think it is, houses, and they show a tiered back building and section quite precisely. They show shadow diagrams quite precisely. The accepted way of assessing to get an understanding on a conceptual notion, a submission, is an artist's impression, an elevation, a model. To my knowledge, there is no other way of assessing a submission for a building form of 6 stories in a narrow street of single-storey dwellings on one side of heritage. It is beyond a layperson's ability to assess it. So what normally happens is a submission, which might have taken 150 hours to do, which could have been generated automatically with 3D programs. A massing model could have been submitted to assist Council in reasonably understanding the conceptual nature and impact, and that wasn't provided. So I've taken the time to prepare a conceptual model. It is only a conceptual model, and if you look at the existing streetscape, this was taken off Google Maps, it shows a narrow street, single period homes, heritage on one side, and on the proposed, it shows an approximation, conceptual, of the mass of the proposal.
We're at 5 minutes, Mr.
Okay.
Ryan.
So my question is that if Council now feels that perhaps they didn't have sufficient information to reasonably understand at a conceptual level the impact on the neighbourhood, and now by submitting this information, and they feel they have a reasonable understanding of the conceptual impact of the neighbourhood, then how can they move to step 2, which is making a decision tonight if step 1 has not been satisfied?
Thanks very much, Mr Delaney. And thank you for your documents.
Thank you.
Nigel Hurd. Mr Hurd, can I ask you to just read your name into the record and
Sure can.
and your suburb?
Hello, councillors. My name's Nigel Hurd. I live in Rosamond Street in Balaclava, which happens to be one street parallel to where you're going to build this monstrosity. Now, I have no objection to the housing first in terms of the planning and the objective of housing different people in our community, and probably less fortunate than we are. My proposal, or my question for council, is a couple, very quickly. I won't take 5 minutes, I promise. Is that the submissions that we've already put together, there were 180 people, 180 local residents, people of this community, that you've essentially ignored or brushed off, which I'm not too pleased about. But in terms of housing first, awesome, great stuff, love the initiative. But in terms of the size and the height, and I understand that we can take that further through VCAT, and you will see us at VCAT, so get ready for that. And also, in terms of the size and height of the development, it's huge. You're going to have 40-odd apartments with maybe 2 or 3 residents per apartment. I know that there's some facts in relation to that, but the parking and the safety of those residents is a concern. And it's also a concern of mine too in relation to that the property that you're developing is opposite property that we can't develop. Our properties are heritage listed, and it is a pocket of Melbourne that needs to be protected. You're about to put a major monstrosity right on the doorstep of something that we can't do anything about. So my question tonight is, why have you ignored local residents, the 180 responses? I can see that you have responded in relation to what those residents' comments were, but there's no response back to me to tell me why they aren't valid or not. The comments that you've made don't actually specifically say anything in relation to why. So my question is why have you ignored our locals? There are a few residents here tonight. There are a few that couldn't be here tonight. So that's my concern, and that's my question for council. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr Carroll, may I ask you to respond to that?
Through you, Acting Mayor. We haven't ignored the input of the various submitters. It's addressed in the report. We've carefully considered all the issues raised and responded to those in the summaries, but we're also in the front of the report we talk about, while there has been some concerns raised and some local dissatisfaction with the proposal, that on balance, when looking at the council's strategic priorities and broader responsibilities for the community and its affordable housing objectives, this is an ideal site for affordable housing, and therefore we are proposing to support this proposal, and further we can go through a planning process where community views can be heard and potentially adjust the proposal further.
Thanks very much, Mr Carroll. Next speaker is Jeffrey Love. Mr Love, may I ask you to name and suburb, please?
You may. Jeffrey Love, St Kilda. And I thank Council and officers for this opportunity to address you tonight. And you, Acting Mayor Gross. I wish to speak in support of the proposed social housing development in Marlborough Street by Housing First. I speak as a resident of Housing First property and as one born in St Kilda over 60 years ago. In my lifetime, I have seen St Kilda transform from a place of cheap rental housing to one of increasing unaffordability. There is a crisis in Australia in affordable accommodation, which can only be met by provision of social housing. The City of Port Phillip has been at the forefront of local governments in providing social housing. Housing is the most important of human needs, and the current crisis of homelessness is inexcusable in a wealthy country like ours. The objections to the proposed development I have read are not evidence-based, and those about the quality of social housing tenants are offensive. I have rented privately for decades in this area, and the year I was given a Housing First residence, rents had increased by 50% in that year. I would have been forced to leave my community. My Housing First neighbours are perfectly decent locals who can no longer afford the rents charged by greedy owners. Housing First is a far better property manager than any private owner that I've had. They encourage a sense of community and provide positive programs for residents to engage with. Housing First is also a builder of quality. They seek to be innovative, whereas in my experience many private developers seek to cut corners. I urge Council to adopt the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr Love. Brad McCormack.
Hi, my name is Brad McCormack and I'm from Rosamond Street in Balaclava. I'd just like to start by saying that I'm all for community housing and support all the work that's done by Housing First. I guess my concerns go back to the planning of the building that is proposed to be built, and I know that you mentioned earlier that this is not discussing that, but rather the sale of the land. I guess my question is, how can a decision be made about the sale if we don't know what the outcome is going to be? And how can we determine that that is the best thing for community housing if we don't know what it's going to look like?
I'll ask that question of Mr Carroll, but I'm happy for you to ventilate, even though it's not strictly relevant, if you've got any new planning concerns. But Mr Carroll?
Through you, Acting Mayor. So what we're considering tonight is the transfer of the land on the basis of broader objectives that we want to achieve from that land in support of broader council objectives around affordable housing. That has to be done, though, within a context of a planning scheme. This proposal aligns with that planning scheme, but also through a planning process. The decision-making around the scale, the size, the massing, the general kind of design will go through a separate process. What we're considering tonight is what we would like to achieve from the site and from the transfer of the land.
Thanks very much, Mr Carroll. Melanie O'Farrell?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sure.
Just hypothetically then, if it was determined that the planning scheme would be for residences for Housing First, is that something then that you would still consider as opposed to 48 residents?
You have to, do it through the chair, ask the question through the chair, sorry. So your question, if I've got it right, is that if in the planning process it was said that...
To keep with the theme of the street and with the heritage view that only a two-storey building could be built. My reading of the officer's recommendation is that if the planning decision makes it unviable for social housing, then Housing First may choose
to not proceed with the proposal, and we'd be back at square one.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Melanie O'Farrell?
Hi, my name's Melanie O'Farrell. I live in Rosamond Street in Balaclava. I guess, like all of the people who have spoken tonight, we're all very supportive of community housing, and I understand you've made it very clear, Acting Mayor, around the planning considerations is not in the scheme of discussion for tonight, and that you are considering other things. I am concerned, I guess, like other residents, that if you make this decision to transfer the land without clearly identifying and responding to the concerns of the neighbourhood, that we really lose some of the wonderful joys of living in the area where we do. You know, being in a heritage listed area, we can't do anything to stop people looking into the backs of our houses, which is the scale of this development. I think if this was done in keeping with the rest of the street and other existing community housing that exists on that street, I don't think you would have had the level of concern from local residents. We're concerned that it appears, and I'm getting some of this information literally in the last 24 hours, that the council has a project plan, but it really isn't being transparent around that, and I think the drawings that were submitted earlier tonight maybe gives us a bit of an insight around that. I'm not an expert in planning process. I'm just a local citizen who's wanting to make her voice heard, wants to support the community, because I concur there's a lot of people who are a lot worse off than us, but we want to make sure that we set up the area for them as well as for us moving forward, and really maintain the livability of the street and the parking to and from. You know, there's at least 40 or 50 cars who use that parking area every day, morning, noon and night, and where are those cars going to go without appropriate planning? And that's what's disappearing, even though I know you're saying that's part of the planning. It just concerns me that this process isn't fully considering the whole picture. Thanks.
Oh, no, we hear that. Thanks very much. Christine Walker, who's our last speaker.
Thank you. I'm Christine Walker and I live in Marlborough Street, and I oppose the transfer of land tonight. My main reasons for doing so is because this is quite overwhelming in two substantial ways. We are being overwhelmed by social housing, and I'll explain this a little bit in more detail in the street, and the scale and magnitude that's proposed, which you are making a decision about. I think effectively if you decide today to proceed, you are implicitly approving a building of that scale. Nobody is insensitive to the problems of homelessness and affordable housing. And the council has an amazing policy that's 30 years old that was set up when there was a trickle of problems. We've now got a tsunami, so it's a very difficult world. There are two railroad tracks that the council's running on, and they're primarily around the basis of the In My Backyard social policy, and that the land has been earmarked for many years. Within this discussion, there is never any mention of the broader community, and whilst homelessness and affordable housing are very important, so too is anybody else who already lives in the area. So let's address the first railroad track, which is that the land's been earmarked. The timeline is this: in 2004 the land was earmarked for low density housing, and we need to emphasise low, and at that time there was no capacity to build developments of this scale on that block of land. It's in keeping with all of the other current social housing that's also scattered through that pocket of Balaclava, and by that pocket I mean the one that runs down to Brighton Road, Chapel Street and up to Carlisle. So there's quite a lot of social housing in that area. Woodstock was then built in 2006. That's on the corner of Marlborough Street. That has 30 units in it already. Significantly, in 2004 there was no plan to build over the car park, so that potential scenario that we've got now wouldn't have happened. There has been no reconsideration of the use of the land subsequent to its earmarking in 2004, and that was made very apparent by the response to the submissions that were written by your executives Because it's been in the plan for a long time, it hasn't been available to any of the other areas of the government, of your organisation to consider. So there's the second rail, or the grease upon the rail track is in fact, it's in the plan. But there are two conditions that have changed here. One is that Woodstock was built, so we already have 30 units in that street, and it's gone from low density to high density. The second railway track is in my backyard. And people have said, well, you just don't want this in your street. Well, that's a very poor argument because we have it in our street. We have it behind us. We have it all around us. So we already have 30 units. If this gets built, there will be a 4-to-1 ratio of social housing to private housing. Your executive again pointed out in the response to submissions that there are 2,800 houses in Balaclava, and I'm very grateful for that. The idea is that actually I shouldn't just be referencing our street, but actually, do you know what, when you calculate that out, our street, Little Marlborough Street, it's about 150 metres long, will be providing 3% of all of the social housing in Balaclava. And that's half of the 7.5% target. So it's being delivered by one street. Social policies in my backyard work if the contribution is shared across the community. The contribution cannot fall on one small portion. The other thing that happens is that 400% more social housing in one street than private housing means there is no diversity in the street. That was a key criterion in your consideration in the first step. We want diversity and we want inclusivity in the street. This is my conclusion, thank you. And this development will result in a monoculture in the street. Marlborough Street cannot be relied upon to contribute so much on behalf of the whole community. This is a shared responsibility. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms Walker. I misled you. You're not the last speaker. So I had late notice that Jonathan Gutman is wishing to speak to us. Jonathan?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. Jonathan Gutman, I live in Nightingale Street, Balaclava. I wanted to talk in support of the recommendation before you tonight. I wanted to clarify from my perspective, I certainly believe there is a conceptual framework. The Council did a lot of work on its structure plan, which sets a very clear conceptual framework for your ability to make this decision under the Local Government Act to sell the land. I wanted to reinforce too some of the sentiments in the submission that I made to Council about the importance of this project. My perceptions around the inclusiveness of your community and what Port Phillip Housing has done historically within our local area and how important that is. I also wanted to reinforce some of the value of this land to people living close to public transport who might not be as fortunate as many others to live in locations like this. I think from your council's perspective in terms of delivering its strategic aspiration and its structure plan, there couldn't be a better end user for the land that you have in question. And finally, I just wanted to acknowledge the last point in the recommendation, which is, and I appreciate the officers incorporating this, which is to recognise the commercial aspect could be put to a social enterprise, and I think the social enterprise component is quite an important one with respect to activating the land in a really positive way. So I'd encourage you to also consider that component of the recommendation. There is certainly a planning journey for this process to go on, but I think there's very much a very clear framework for you to be able to make the decision tonight. And having heard the submissions from the residents I live with, there are a number of different perspectives. The reason I came tonight to speak was I was confronted in the street by people who were opposed to this, who made a very strong position in Carlisle Street as to what their view was. It's certainly, from my perspective, not the view that a number of other people I've shared this process with necessarily hold either. So I don't think the council should take that the submissions you see before you are necessarily reflective of the view expressed by the entire community of the local area. So I do encourage you to strongly support the recommendation that the officers have made, and really see this project as an opportunity to further strengthen what your council has historically and hopefully does continue to stand for in the future. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr Goodman. Councillors, that's the last of the public submissions. We have an officer's recommendation. Do councillors have questions, or would you like to go straight to the resolution? Councillor Crawford.
So there's been some mention of some conceptual stages that we haven't done due process. So I'd just like some clarity around that the decision we're making tonight we are making in the appropriate way, and the clarity around the clear process that we've followed, please.
Through you, Acting Mayor, the process that we're following, have been following, and which this report is part of that process, is the notification of intention to sell the land, not the planning analysis or the planning process. And so this process involves advertising the intention to sell, councillors considering submissions on that notification, and then making a decision. And so there has been a council report where there was a notice. There was some community engagement to make sure that the community understood what was being advertised. Then there was a council report to consider those proposals, and then tonight, or to acknowledge those proposals, and then tonight, pardon me, is council considering the proposals and making a decision.
So just to follow up, if I may, Acting Mayor, so we don't need to have a conceptual in terms of transferring or sale of land. We just need to understand that the intent is for social housing and some rough parameters, not a conceptual idea, given that's a separate process of what the building that may come to us as a planning permit has to be.
Through you, Acting Mayor, that's correct. The concept plan was included for transparency, to give people an idea of what was being intended. The planning process will come once councillors made a decision on the land.
Councillor Simic.
And is it possible or somewhat premature to outline the process from here, which others will also have an opportunity to participate in, depending on what decision is made tonight?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I think it's important to understand that for the transfer to actually occur, a few key things need to happen. One of them is for PPHA to develop their design and lodge a development application. Assuming that they achieve approval, they need to obtain financing, they need to have this development constructed and then subdivided, and only at that stage does the potential transfer occur.
Thanks, Mr Savinkov. Any other questions? Councillor Bond.
We use the term sale to describe the process, but wouldn't it be more accurate to say gift? Given there's no actual sale price, or there may be a nominal $1 sale price to Housing First in the event this should materialise. But why do we use the term sale when it's in fact gifting?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I'll give my answer and then might be followed up by Mr Savinkov. But there is a transaction that is occurring for this process, that council is contributing land for the receiving of benefits, those being social housing, and so there is a transaction occurring. Do you have an additional?
And for that transaction, we're using the statutory term of sale.
Can I do a follow-up question? I use the word transfer. Is that the wrong word? Should we use sale? I suppose they're synonymous, really, aren't they?
The meaning in this case is clear.
Yeah. Councillor Bond?
To what value do we intend to sell this parcel of land to Housing First at? Because that isn't mentioned in our report here.
Well, it is, isn't it? Mr. Savinkov?
The sum is a nominal sum.
What would that nominal sum be?
Yeah, sure, but we'll just wait for Mr. Savinkov to answer Councillor Bond's question. Whilst you're thinking of that, I mean, my answer would have been that we're getting a nominal amount plus the provision of housing services. So the consideration it passes is both a nominal amount plus the provision of social housing services.
Through you, Acting Mayor, that's correct. The consideration in this part is, at this stage, looking at around the 45, 46 affordable housing units, leveraging significant investment potentially from the state as well as from Housing First to turn this land into land plus affordable housing units.
Thanks very much, Mr. Carroll. Follow up, Mr. Councillor Bond, and then.
Well, I just wanted to clarify. So the nominal amount, the minimal amount is really, the minimum amount is 35 housing units is really so much, it's not so much a sum as that is the minimum that we would allow in terms of approval for the sale of land.
Through you, Acting Mayor. So the price as defined in the heads of agreement is the consideration is PPHA, now Housing First, entering into the contract of sale and the Section 173 agreement. So taking on those obligations of those documents.
Just to add to that, is that heads of agreement specifies the provision of a range of public housing, which is up to how much?
So the starting point in the heads of agreement is the concept plan. That includes 46 dwellings. So that creates a starting point and expectation for council, for PPHA and for the community.
What would be the current market value of this parcel of land?
So, through you, Deputy Mayor, it's important to keep in mind that it's not the entire parcel that's being transferred. The entire parcel was most recently valued at approximately $7 million.
Through you, Acting Mayor, so what we mean by that is that the car parking facility and land part for the car parking is retained by council. We estimate the value of that, and Mr Savinkov will correct me if I'm wrong, is around $2 million. So the value of the air rights and components being proposed to be transferred to Housing First would be around $5 million.
$5 million, okay. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Pearl?
Just on the 47 units in the heads of agreement, is that a minimum?
There's no minimum stipulated in, through you, Deputy Mayor, there's no minimum stipulated in the heads of agreement. Ultimately, it would be up to council to determine what that minimum is. The starting point and the intention is that the entire project is community housing.
So just a follow-up, if I could. It's the Chair's decision to do that.
Sure. Look, can I ask, the CEO has indicated that he just wants to add to the debate.
Could you explain for council in response to the previous question, paragraph 4.21, which talks about a minimum of no less than 34 dwellings would be required for the project to pull its weight strategically? Because I think there is mention in the report of a bottom level. I'm just trying to assist with the answer, Councillor Pearl.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. the reference there to a specific number of dwellings contemplates a situation where, should funding not be received, the required funding not be received to support a 100% a development of 100% community housing, then council may contemplate a development which incorporates some private housing. So the note there refers to a specific number of community housing, a threshold number, as a suggested threshold, should we get to that situation. And it's based on, it's just a simple calculation based on council's existing strategy and what its policy is, what its objectives are in that strategy. It's aiming to achieve X number of community housing dwellings in the city from a certain amount of dollar investment. So we've taken the $5 million investment that's contemplated by this transaction, and from that extrapolated a minimum number of dwellings that would need to be achieved from this particular development to put us on a trajectory to ultimately achieve that target in our backyard.
Thanks, Anthony. Councillor Pearl?
Feeds well into my next question. The 13 units, the difference between the 34 and the 47 that could potentially be sold on the private market, when would they be sold? So the land would be constructed, the project would be constructed, land title would transfer. Would the private property be transferred during construction phase or after we gift the land and then constructed, and then private dwellings would be sold after? How would that work if private dwellings were sold through a private development on effectively what is currently council land?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I'll just clarify that when we talk about private dwellings, they wouldn't necessarily need to be sold. So they could be rented out privately, for instance. So the tenants would be private tenants rather than community housing tenants. Any transaction could only occur from PPHA once they had ownership of the dwellings themselves. So that could only occur once they'd been developed and subdivided.
But council would have no control over that process.
Through you, Acting Mayor, the decision to proceed with this development is dependent on funding, and so the funding model needs to be decided and achieved first, and that will identify the need for whether or not there's a gap between the funding that's provided by council, Housing First and state government, and if there is a gap, then there needs to be a clear decision made about whether to proceed or not and what level of offset around that is acceptable to council. So council will come back on that.
Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Bond?
Just going back to a point you raised a minute or so ago where you said one of the drivers for this project is a council policy or desire to create a certain number of housing units, social housing units, over a certain period of time. And for that reason, we would seek to maximise the number of units on this site in order to help achieve that other goal. Would it not then be argued that we as councillors are compromised in our ability to come back in a couple of months' time or even 12 months' time and fairly assess any application for this site? Because in the back of our minds, we're going to have this alternate driver to the planning scheme on which we are required by law to assess this proposal. So I guess the question is how do we as councillors deal with this compromised position we naturally find ourselves in?
Look, I'll allow this question, but I'm a bit concerned that the people who are opposed to the officer's recommendations are asking long and difficult and questions unfairly of the officers. So I'll allow this one, but can we keep the vigorous interchange to debate?
Point of order, Councillor Gross. I haven't made a decision yet. I still,
Okay.
according to the law, have an open mind, so I think you withdraw your statement that I am opposed to this officer's recommendation.
I'll withdraw the implication that you've altered, that you've made your mind up, but I still think that we have to, the officers can't fire back. We have to keep our vigorous debate for the next process to come. I apologise for imputing that that I know your mind.
You might ask Mr. Jung to answer that.
Mr. Jung?
Through you, Acting Mayor, Council does have a number of roles in relation to this site. One is its current landlord, but it has a separate and quite distinct role as a responsible authority for making a decision on any planning permit application that comes before it. Council also, as a planning authority, has established planning parameters around this site which sit within the Port Phillip planning scheme and implement the structure plan that Council adopted in 2009, and they're quite distinct and site-specific planning controls that talk about the scale of the building and the form of the building on this particular site, that when it acts as a responsible authority, it will implement those.
Thanks very much.
Just to follow up on that and to ask whether, is this not often the case that council has and councillors have several roles to perform in a process as long as complicated as this one?
Through Acting Mayor, certainly Council has undertaken similar projects in the past where it is both the landlord and future sale of the land and the responsible authority, and is very clear about the probity around those processes and making sure that it makes decisions under each of those roles separately.
Thanks very much. Councillors, I sense we're moving to the stage where we can cope with a motion. Councillor Copsey?
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Baxter? Councillor Copsey, do you wish to speak now?
I will. So thank you everybody who has made submissions to this process, both those that have been received via email and are outlined in the councillor's report, those who have been sent directly to council, and those who've taken time to come and present tonight. Councillors I've been reading and taking on board the perspectives that have come through from the community, both ways, and will take those into consideration forming my decision tonight. This council has committed to growing social and affordable housing in our municipality. We have inherited the In Our Backyard strategy, which has a goal to maintain social housing at a percentage which was around 7.2% when the strategy was set. Everyone has a right to a safe and secure home, and this council has done more than many other municipal bodies in trying to advance that and make sure that in the face of growing unaffordability and an increase in homelessness, we are pulling our weight in terms of contributing to social housing. It's not something that we can achieve on our own. We urgently need investment in public, affordable and social housing from federal and state governments as well. And Council will continue to seek opportunities to grow social housing in our area in line with our strategy until it is no longer our strategy. And I've said before that in this chamber that I feel very privileged to stand on the shoulders of giants in terms of advancing this cause at a local government level in Port Phillip. It's a council where we've had a long and strong commitment to maintaining affordable places and supported places for people to live, because without housing, life is very difficult. It is hard to participate in community. It is hard to have your life together if you don't have a roof over your head. So that's the reason that we have the In Our Backyard policy, and it's a good one. We've just come through Homelessness Week, and I know many of my fellow councillors have given their time to help support people experiencing homelessness during Homelessness Week, and it's a timely reminder of the urgency of need in our municipality in particular. We have the second highest rate of people sleeping rough in the city of Port Phillip, outside the city of Melbourne, in all of Victoria. So the need is urgent. During Homelessness Week, we also saw SWAG, who are the Support Workers Action Group, take an action outside the now closed Gatwick, where we lost 89 beds of crisis accommodation that were by no means desirable from many perspectives, but were providing a place for people to sleep when there was no other option. And one of the signs that the Support Workers Action Group was holding up outside that really stuck with me. It was one of the workers' signs reading that they were tired of leaving work for the day and not knowing whether their client would survive the night. In my previous role, before I came to council, I worked with pro bono as a lawyer with people who were experiencing homelessness, and I've also had that worry and that fear at times when dealing with clients. So all of that is sort of by way of context. To say that we have a very urgent need in Port Phillip and that this council has committed to a policy and maintains a policy of growing social housing. But we have to consider this site and the potential transfer, taking into account the submissions that we've heard from the public tonight as well, and I hear the views that have been expressed. Those who are concerned about planning matters, rest assured, the officer's recommendation tonight makes clear that the sale of land only proceeds conditional on Housing First securing a planning approval and reaching practical completion, and there will be a separate process for people to participate in to address planning concerns. And I would urge those who are affected by this proposal and who both support or oppose it to participate in that, to make sure that your views are fully heard and considered as part of that proposal as well. All of that said, I will be supporting the officer's recommendation tonight. This site has long been earmarked for social housing, and it will be interesting, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with the community and listening in the next phase with a different hat on to make sure that we are progressing this with due process and an opportunity for everyone to participate. So thank you again for those who've taken the time to attend tonight. I'll be supporting this because I think it's very important that we maintain people in housing, not just because it's the compassionate thing to do, but from a social planning perspective, it's also the smart thing to do. It costs a lot more to maintain people in homelessness than it does to house them properly. And also because it's the right thing to do. I'm strongly supportive of the growth of social housing in Port Phillip and consider that the proximity to transport services and shops make this a really ideal location for Housing First to further explore provision of social housing on this site. I look forward to coming with an open mind to the next steps in this process, but I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Baxter.
There we are. Okay. Thank you, Acting Mayor. Look, I think Councillor Copsey has said a lot of very profound things when it comes to social housing. What I'd like to acknowledge first is all of the people that have come and made submissions here. So I've lived in Balaclava for 13 years, and I spent a lot of time in that area. I often ride my bike down Nightingale Street, and Jonathan's seen me go past, and I'm always walking up there anyway because you need to go to the train station or the shops or whatever. And I know a lot of people in that area and speak to a lot of people in that area, and I absolutely acknowledge that there's a diversity of views in that area about social housing, about any kind of development. There's different views on that. What's going on Carlisle Street, all of these things, conversations that I'm having every day. So I do appreciate that people come here and talk about the sorts of things that they think are important. Having said that, I do think some people here have come here to talk about planning, which I understand that there's some confusion in the community that people think that we can't transfer this land without totally signing up to a particular kind of development, and I want to say that that's not the case. But if it seems like there are quite a few people who aren't quite sure how that works, and that's probably on us for not communicating that well enough, so we can probably do better in terms of making sure that people understand the separation between this process and the planning process, and how we can wear two hats at once, and how that's pretty normal for council. We take it for granted, but for a lot of people in the community, they would think it's an odd concept. So I certainly understand that. As I said, as someone who lives in this area, I think that providing this land for social housing is the best use of this land. It's right next to a major train station and major transport hub and activity centre, and that's where you tend to want to house people. I think that providing social housing is a massive benefit to the entire community as a whole, not just the people that get housed there, but the whole community benefits, because every single person that gets housed there goes from being someone who was ostracised and on the margins of your community and who can't fully participate as a community member, or feels that they can't fully participate as a community member. They go from that to someone who can actually become a part of your community and really become one of your neighbours, and strengthen our community that way. So I'm really pleased that after 14 years we're getting to the point where we're going to get some kind of social housing. Assuming all goes well with planning and stuff, we're going to get some kind of social housing on this site. The nature exactly of that, we'll go through the planning process and find out. But I'm very pleased that we can get to this point. I understand some people are concerned about social housing, but it's actually particularly with the kind of people that live in the social housing. I understand there's some concern there, but what I would say is that when we don't provide housing for people, the area gets more dangerous. And when you house people, the area gets safer. That's what happens. You're pulling people off of the street. So I'm quite willing to keep talking to people about this, and I'm sure I'll see lots of people here when we're making our planning decisions. And when it comes to height and mass and bulk and all of those sorts of things, those are very important concerns, and I expect people to come and argue strenuously when it comes to protecting heritage and that sort of stuff. That's normal, that's good, you absolutely do that. Do what you need to do. This is about transferring the land for social housing, and I'm going to absolutely support that.
Thanks, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Crawford.
So there are lots of concerns, and I do hope that some of the concerns will be addressed in the next stage, the process, should this go through tonight. But I keep coming back to a couple of things. Some of the key people that we'll be targeting to live in this kind of housing are women over 55 and families. People who are already members of our community but are struggling now to pay the rent as we live in a very gentrified area, and prices seek to be just keep growing. We also it's people who have always lived here but can't afford to. It's people like artists. It's women who've contributed to the society here. And I often think that the women that we're looking, if that's a target group for us, are women who don't have much superannuation, who are on their own. And I keep thinking, I'm a single woman, what if it's me at some point? What if it was my mother? What if it was my grandmother? So knowing that the housing wait list in Victoria is 10 to 20 years plus, I understand there are concerns, but I keep coming back to, if we have a piece of land and we can house people and take a few more people off that 20-year waiting list, then actually that's my greater responsibility in this decision tonight. So I will support handing this sale of land to Housing First in order to deliver good, supported social housing in our community in a very appropriate spot. And I look forward to addressing many of the concerns the community has in the planning stage. But I'm very clear that when it comes to housing people, I see that as a priority, especially women over 55, who I could be one of those myself in the near future. And I would like to think that people would make decisions that it would allow vulnerable people, like myself maybe at that point in time, to have a home.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Bond?
I won't be supporting this for 3 reasons, which I will outline. Firstly is I don't see council as the owner of this site. This site was purchased back in the old City of St Kilda days through a special rate imposed on the Carlisle Street traders. So therefore, in my eyes, I see this site as belonging to the traders, not as belonging to the council, and it should be up to the traders to decide what they do with what I see as being their site, not us. Secondly, the outcome here for what's going to be invested into this location in order to achieve somewhere between 34 and 47 units. With that same sort of money on the open market, we could achieve a much better outcome. You could purchase a far greater number of units on the open market by negotiating directly, either with just purchasing properties off a real estate agent, or negotiating with a developer for a bulk purchase of properties within their existing development, and you would achieve far more than the 34 to 47 units we're proposing here, and house many more people than what are proposed to house here. The third reason I won't support it is I think we are conflicted as councillors in this process. We have an aim to maximise the number of affordable housing units within our municipality. At the same time, we need to sit in judgment on a proposal that hopes to achieve just that and maintain an open mind. I just don't think it's likely that we're able to go into that process with an open mind when we've already decided that we want to maximise the number of housing units within a particular development. I think a classic example of that, as I discuss with Councillor Gross all the time, is the St Kilda Triangle. Where that went wrong is council sat there with 2 roles. We tried to be both the developer and the planning authority that sat in judgment of that same developer. And I know we do that all the time, but every now and again a case comes along where there's, I think we are more conflicted than we usually are in those sorts of situations, and therefore we're not sitting in judgments of these applications with an open mind as we're required to do by law. So for those 3 reasons, I will not be supporting this transfer of land to Housing First.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bond. Any other speakers? Councillor Pearl?
I won't add to what Councillor Bond said in his 3 points other than his last one, and I'll add one more. And Councillor Baxter's right when he says these conflicts arise often, but when they do arise, it's incumbent upon council to do everything possible to ensure that we act in a transparent fashion, that our community can have full confidence that we're doing this correctly. We have ice cream huts on the St Kilda foreshore that we spend months going through expression of interest process on for less than $100,000 in rental, to ensure that when we've got that conflict in place, we're providing a transparent process to our community. With this, no such process is required, yet we're gifting millions and millions of dollars of what is public land. This process doesn't provide a basic level of transparency to ensure that ratepayers are getting a good deal, and we're getting a good deal to achieve our council plan. And the end result of this could be, and it's an end risk, is that if the unit cost of this development is at a high level as Councillor Bond has indicated, it could stifle forward development of council because of the fact we're not actually delivering value for ratepayers. If, as what's been proposed, this per unit value is substantially higher than what the public open market we can acquire for, or better outcomes through other development options, they should be considered, but none have been considered in this proposal. The final point I'll make is this potentially stifles innovation in the housing sector. There's hundreds of quality organisations across Australia that are trying to get involved and get their foot in the door, and projects such as this would be, prime property for someone to have a look at. yet we have to go to one provider without even going out into the open market. How does that, councillors, provide innovation into a sector that desperately needs it when you have housing affordability crisis in this country and you have a financing structure at the moment we have? We're not serving our plan. We're not producing a cheapest cost per unit outcome to achieve uplift in public housing, and we're not promoting innovation in our municipality, which is why I would encourage you to not support this motion tonight.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Simic.
Well, I thought we almost had Councillor Pearl there in the end when he said that he's going to support it. Thank you, everyone who's spoken tonight, and good evening, everyone. We heard people raise quite a number of issues tonight, the size and bulk of what's been proposed, issues around process, challenging us to have a reasonable conceptual understanding, questions around process and whether it's been followed, that it places an undue burden on Balaclava to provide a high level of social housing. We also heard speakers in support of this project, an account of a resident who lives in social housing and other residents of Balaclava. We've also received many submissions against the proposal and in support. This has indeed been a very long process. It's our duty to keep an open mind as we're making decisions in our role as councillors. On balance, having heard all of the information tonight and having looked at the submissions and the officer's report, I believe that it's important for us to support the officer's recommendation. Our In Our Backyard strategy sets a very ambitious target of 7.2% of social housing for us to maintain that level. I say ambitious because that's really hard work for council to work towards, but not ambitious in the scale of need that's required, and not ambitious considering the percentage of social housing other countries have as targets. So for us, this means, as a council, delivering 170 new units, and also through other strategies of In Our Backyard, delivering residual 750 additional units, which will be required. The housing affordability problem, rental and home ownership, which we've talked about tonight, has deepened and broadened over the last 10 to 20 years in Port Phillip, from affecting the lower 50 to 60% of the income range of residents in 1995 to affecting the lower 70% of income range in 2015, and it keeps getting worse. Less than 1% of private rental housing is affordable to low-income households. Rental housing is unaffordable to all households up to the lower 60 to 7% of income range. And, you know, the stats and information around housing affordability goes on. We're also seeing an increase in homelessness, people sleeping rough and destitute. And for Councillor Crawford and myself, who participated in the homelessness count some weeks ago, we've seen that ourselves firsthand. As I sit here in the chair tonight, I'm also reminded of a gentleman who came to us and sat in the hot seat, as Councillor Gross, the seat of truth, I apologise, as it's been dubbed tonight, and said to us, he spoke to us about his experience of sleeping rough in our municipality, someone who's been here his whole life. He talked about another woman who was a friend of his, who was also sleeping in a car. And he said to us, what are we as council doing to help him? I'm constantly reminded of his words and the impression that he's had on myself, and I know many of the other councillors tonight. I have to say that it's not true, and certainly not substantiated, that you can purchase more units through the open market. Anyone making that claim clearly hasn't been shopping in the city of Port Phillip lately. Developments like Marlborough Street are likely to offer a mix of housing, 1-bedroom units, 2-bedroom units, 3-bedroom units. You can't buy 3-bedroom units for some $500 or whatever the per apartment cost ends up to be for Marlborough Street and is for similar developments. I think it's important for us to keep in mind that we are talking about transferring this land to a registered housing association who has experience and it takes every care to make sure that the cost of each and every single acquisition is kept as low as possible and is appropriate for housing the people that we're working to support. On balance, I believe that it's our responsibility to work with all levels of government, to continue to work with them to address this problem. This project, and I have to remind everyone, has been 14 years in the making. So the conversation with Housing First to transfer this land began 14 years ago. We're not making a decision that's come out of the blue to deal with one housing provider or another, and this does not set a precedent for future decisions that this council will be making. As I've said, Housing First is a registered housing association. It's heavily regulated and bound by their mission to provide social housing. I hope that the state government also continues to support this project. They recently provided $200,000 for continued development of the business plan, but more funding from the state government is required in order to realise Marlborough Street. I think that this council has been a leader in working with the community to provide social housing. The needs are getting bigger, and it's important for us to continue this work. So having considered all of the information, I will be supporting the officer's recommendation, and I urge and call on all of the councillors to do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Copsey.
That's been a really interesting and thought-provoking debate, so thank you, councillors, for all your contributions tonight. Those councillors who've, expressed concern that we're stifling innovation, we've been a leader in innovating in the City of Port Phillip in delivering social housing, and I, for one, am determined that we'll continue to play that role, and I look forward to those councillors who are interested in seeing innovative housing models getting behind further delivery of social housing through different models that we might consider as we continue to roll out in our backyard. Principles, I think 6 and 7, I think it is, of that policy are specifically around partnerships and innovation, so I welcome councillors to put their connections and networks and ideas into bringing further ideas to the group of councillors that we can consider for how we can roll out further units to get us towards our target. I have to say, as a renter in the City of Port Phillip, I concur. I don't quite understand where assertions that we're going to be getting better value for money for the level of investment that this might represent are coming from, though I'm certainly open to considering, again, future proposals that might get us good value for money in delivering further social housing, and I look forward to continuing that discussion with my fellow councillors. And in terms of councillors having the dual role, certainly we have to take our role as a responsible authority very seriously anytime we sit in that capacity. If any councillor considers that they are incapable of exercising that role without being in conflict, then they should bring that up and act appropriately when we are sitting in the future, should this pass, in our planning capacity. However, I'm sure that officers can provide advice to any councillor who considers that they've got issues that they need to manage. All that said, I think I was a bit... I'm sometimes overwhelmed by the scale of challenge when it comes to homelessness and housing affordability, and I know that many in our society feel the same. But actually, should this proposal succeed, I think it's a really joyous occasion for this council to know that we have an opportunity to explore provision of social housing on this site. And I am looking forward to the progression of the project through the appropriate channels and to doing our bit to contribute to the solution that is actually within our grasp. And hopefully, in terms of this remaining in innovation, I know that certainly other municipalities look to Port Phillip's model of provision and others, and I hope we can continue to provide an inspiration and example to other municipalities who are looking to tackle unaffordability and homelessness in their areas as well.
Thanks very much, Councillor Copsey. I will now put the motion.
Request we do that under division, please, Councillor Gross. You can do it before the vote.
Sure. So let's do it under division. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Bond and Councillor Pearl. I declare the motion passed and carried. Thanks very much. Let's move on to our next one, which is Child Services. Yeah, and we've got one speaker on this. Yep. Leonie. We'll just wait until the chamber clears. You press a button with...
Is it working?
It's on, but you've got to get close to it.
Bye-bye.
So, Leonie, could I ask you to do your name and suburb?
Yes, thank you, Acting Mayor. Leonie Miller from Ripponlea, and I'm here tonight not as a parent member of the Committee of Management, obviously, looking at my hair, of the Avenue Childcare Centre, but as a grandparent who has been requested by her daughter to attend the meeting in her absence.
And you're a very good mummy.
I didn't realise it was going to be such a controversial meeting, but it has been very interesting for me. So on behalf of the Committee of Management at the Avenue, I would like to thank the Council and the officers for this opportunity to present tonight, and also for the opportunity to contribute to the review of children's services. Now, while I don't think the Committee of Management has any difficulty with the principles espoused in the draft policy, they would like me to make 3 points in relation to it. And these points are, firstly, that in the final wording, I suppose, and particularly the implementation of the Children's Service Policy, that the Council remains committed to a diversity of provision in childcare services in the City of Port Phillip. This includes affirming and supporting the valuable role that small community centres, smaller and older community centres, community-managed, community-run centres play in the life of the local community. And as a grandparent who walks down the street with our grandchildren on the days when they're not at the Avenue, I can attest to the fact that lots of people stop us in the street and say, "Oh, hello, Luke," and it's because they know him from the childcare centre. A young family who moved from Sydney earlier this year, we first met up with them in the park opposite our house at Ripponlea, and the reason we met up with them was because Luke yells out, "Hello, Thea." The little girl who was there is also at the Avenue, and that has provided an in into the life of Port Phillip community, which I think is really important for new families arriving in the area. Secondly, the Committee of Management contends that the current funding model requires some reform. A review of the operation and quality subsidies could both identify potential cost savings and at the same time ensure that the most viable centres, of which the Avenue is one, it has a 90 to 95% occupancy rate. It's got the lowest fees of any childcare centre, council or community run in the City of Port Phillip, and yet it's going very well. They want that to continue to operate at optimal levels and to receive the funding for necessary upgrades, because there are some upgrades necessary at the centre. Finally, and my final point, the Committee of Management reiterates its proposal to jointly upgrade the centre through a co-funding arrangement with the City of Port Phillip to ensure the completion of much-needed capital works. I know that they have been involved in discussions with both the officers and some council members in relation to that. It was put on hold because of the review, but they would like to reiterate to all of you that they are very willing to continue, to recommence and continue those discussions. And finally, thank you for the opportunity to listen to Grandma.
Well, Nana, thanks very much for that, those uplifting anecdotes about our community. Councillors, questions? There are no questions. I'll now... One question, Councillor Copsey.
if the officers will indulge me, I was wondering if the officers might outline the next steps for community engagement that are proposed in progressing the draft strategy.
Through you, Acting Mayor. The next steps that are proposed are that we return to Council on the 5th of September with these draft key policy objectives, slightly more refined so that we can come up with objectives that have some more measurable outcomes. That is an opportunity, again, for the public to comment, but for Council to make a decision. From there, Council officers will draft a service response with options and recommendations to come back to Council for a resolution to allow us to engage the community on that service response.
Thanks very much, Ms Ahmed. Do we have any other questions? I'd now like to ask for a resolution. Does anyone wish to move the officer's recommendation? Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Seconded, Councillor Pearl. Do you wish to speak to this motion?
Only to say thank you to all the people that contributed, and it's great to see how much interest there is in, providing quality and being, what Council's role could be and all the various considerations, because I do know that there are lots of valuable providers and the quality of childcare in this city across the board is of a very high standard. So just thank you, really, at this stage of the game.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Pearl? Is there any other speakers? Councillor Baxter?
I won't go on for too long, but and rather than thank everybody that's been involved, I think that's implied. I think it's great that people have been involved. I've actually found this process to be fascinating in terms of this is yet another style of consultation that Council has undertaken that's different to we've gone much deeper in on some other things. We've gone much lighter on some other things. This is yet another way that we've engaged with stakeholders and families and people that are involved. That's actually been really interesting to watch. And the workshop that was in this chamber a couple of weeks ago that drew on the experience of the people that most affected and interested in this review was really, really interesting. And I just think that I've found this whole process to be pretty good so far, and I'm quite happy to see what comes next.
Okay, any other speakers? I also would like to thank and congratulate the officers. Some of the consultation I've been to have been of the absolute highest calibre, informed by really good work. So, Councillor Crawford, do you wish to close? Move to the vote. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thanks very much. Now, the next resolution, or next topic, has been withdrawn, so I'll now go to 13.1, Itinerant Trading Outdoor Cooking Station Trial, the mid-year update. There's no speakers from the gallery. Councillors, do you have any questions? There being no questions, Councillor Copsey, are you happy to move? Moved Councillor Copsey, seconded Councillor Simic. Does anyone wish to speak to this one? I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? Great. That's been carried overwhelmingly. 13.2, St Kilda Festival Operational Plan and Sponsorship Policy. Oh, poor Adele. There's no speakers to this. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Bond.
When are you due?
We'll take that one on notice. But Ms Dennison, I've got a question. I should have foreshadowed it, but I didn't. But earlier in the year, you gave us some data about, and I just want to get it on the record, if you can recall, some data about the money that was made by traders during the course of the St Kilda Festival. And I thought it was in the many millions, and I just wondered if you can recall that, and if not, I can absolutely happy to take it on notice.
Through you, Acting Mayor, I have figures for economic benefit to St Kilda, which is maybe not quite the same as money made by traders, but...
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, this is what we measure. So we've measured that for a 10-year period, and taking a 10-year average of that, direct in-scope expenditure or economic benefit to St Kilda is 18 million each year.
And last year?
Last year, 22.3 million.
Thanks very much. Any further questions? Councillor Simic? Happy to move, Councillor Simic. Seconded, Councillor Copsey. Speakers against? Move to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. Thanks very much. Sorry there was no more vigorous debate. 13.3, Cultural Development Fund 2018-19, Supplementary Grant Recommendations. There are no questions from the, but there may be councillor questions. No questions from councillors? Does anyone wish to move? Councillor Copsey? Councillor Simic? Dynamic duo. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Copsey?
Just to give context that this supplementary round of recommendations has arisen, and I'd like to thank councillors for supporting the additional funding that was committed to the Cultural Development Fund. Sorely needed extra contribution to support the development of new art and culture in the City of Port Phillip. We hadn't increased the amount through this funding stream for some time, and I know that the recipients that we're able to fund through this tonight will be most grateful to have their projects proceed thanks to the extra funding that was committed through the budget. So as someone who sits on this committee assessing the grants, it is heartbreaking to see how many applicants that are really worthy have missed out in the past because we have not had enough funding to cover all of the worthy projects. There will still be people who miss out this year, unfortunately, but thanks to Council for approving the additional funding and to the community members who sit on the panel and who came and did extra work re-reviewing the applications and providing a second round of recommendations. We are able to produce a few more projects through this grant stream, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them come to life and add to the cultural life in the City of Port Phillip. I'm happy to recommend this to my fellow councillors.
Councillor Simic?
I'd also like to thank the councillors who are part of this process and part of the assessment panel. It is really important that we support cultural development in our community, and this fund is a really good way to do that. It is unfortunate that we can't fund everyone and that some good ideas miss out, but I do know that money for this program has been increased in the budget that was passed about a month ago, and look forward to more opportunities to fund further innovation in the future.
Thanks very much. Any other speakers? I'll move to the vote. You wish to close?
I'll close by saying I forgot to thank the amazing officers who assist us in assessing this fund, and thank you for all your ongoing work and hard work and support to those who seek to apply. It's always remarked upon, I think, by people who've applied to this fund that the officers are available to assist and encourage new applicants, and so thank you very much for your hard work.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Copsey. Move to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Now I'd like to move to 14.1, Assembly of Councillors. Can I have a resolution in relation to that? Moved Councillor Pearl, seconded Councillor Baxter. Speakers against? All those in favour? Declare it carried. There are no notices of motion, which is agenda item 15. Agenda item 16, reports by councillor delegates. I've just got one. This is relation to sort of like a grievance, a grief motion. Council is saddened to hear of the passing of Graham Bride, Foundation member and past president of the Port Melbourne Preservation and Historical Society. Do people know Graham? He was a good man. He and his wife Margaret researched and wrote a number of histories, including a history of a street precinct with David Tomo Thompson and the borough and its people, a fascinating history of Port Melbourne's first 100 years since the arrival of white settlers, and our heartfelt condolences to Margaret and the family go out. Graham's contributions to Port Melbourne and the city of Port Phillip will be, I'm sure, felt for many years to come. So if there are... So if there are no other reports... Oh.
Sorry, we Council, after this one, we just missed the South Melbourne Market. Just need to go back to it.
Ah, right, sorry, that was my fault. Yes, Councillor Baxter?
Look, I'll be very quick, but so I'm Council's delegate to the Friends of Suwai Covalimo group, and they'll be doing a fundraiser, film night on the 30th of August, which I won't give out too much details here. You can look it up, but this will be to raise money for their ongoing work in providing scholarships and renewable energy for people in rural East Timor. So. It's good stuff, and the film is The Merger, which is a comedy film, an Australian comedy film. So go on Facebook, look up the Friends of Suwai, and hopefully come along to the event.
Can't beat a film about footy. Any other reports? I'll move the acceptance of the report. Councillor Simic, seconded Councillor Pearl. All those in favour, against, declare it carried. Now, I wish to move an item of urgent business, so we need to first move that... Oh, sorry, it's a late report.
Yes, the extension of term for South Melbourne Market.
Yep.
We can do urgent motions after that.
Okay, sorry about that, I misled you. So the late report is the extension of terms for independent members of the South Melbourne Market Committee. There are no speakers from the community. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Simic? Happy to move. Councillor Simic, seconder. Councillor Pearl. Any speakers? All those in favour? Carried. Do we have any items of urgent business? We do. Councillor Simic. I need a mover and a seconder for council to consider this as an item of urgent business, and an item of urgent business has to be an item that has to be dealt with at this meeting.
Through you, Acting Mayor, it's an item that can't wait till the next council meeting, essentially.
So, Councillor Simic, can I ask you to move that we consider this as an item of urgent business?
Yes, I'd like to move to consider this as an item.
So you'd have to introduce what the item is and explain why it's urgent before we get to the...
Would you like me to read the urgent, the proposal, or
sure.
The item as a whole? So it's relating to the new governance structure to coordinate and deliver of the Fisherman's Bend Urban Renewal project, which was announced by the state government on the 10th of August 2018. And it's urgent because this will be our first formal opportunity to respond to the framework that the state government has set out.
Thanks. Is there a seconder for this motion? And I want to hear arguments about why it should be urgent. Councillor Baxter? Okay, so it's been moved, and have you spoken to by Councillor Simic. Are there any other speakers?
Can I ask a clarifying
Yes,
question?
ask a question. Why can't this be dealt with at our next meeting?
That's a question for Councillor Simic.
I believe that this response is already too late, as the state government announced the structure on Friday, and we as a council haven't had an opportunity to respond. It's urgent for us to respond to the state government. Waiting 3 weeks until our next council meeting will not be a timely way for us to respond on an issue that's of vital importance to our community.
Councillor Bond.
What deadline will we miss if we don't hear this tonight?
Councillor Simic.
I'm not. This is not with respect to any deadlines, but a process of responding to the state government on an issue which is important to our community, which was announced last Friday, and we, as a council, need to have an agreed position on. I know that our mayor is in discussions with the state government, and that her position and negotiating position, and also position of providing advice to the structure that's been announced, is supported by our ability to discuss this tonight.
Point of order, I don't think the councillor can put a view of another councillor forward without that councillor being in the chamber.
I don't think that is. The view of the mayor is this. No, I said the view of the mayor, no, I said it is.
Well, okay, so I'm going to ask the CEO. I've been advised that I can't rule on the question of urgency. This is a matter for this is a matter for the councillors to rule, and advised by the CEO. Can I ask the CEO if he has any advice in relation to this matter?
I've been asked in relation to the point of order raised by Councillor Pearl. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
We need to clarify what Councillor Simic said, but Councillor Pearl would be correct in that the councillors should constrain debate to their opinion, not the view of the councillor that's not in the chambers. But I'd need to clarify what Councillor Simic said for you to give you advice on ruling on that.
Can I ask you further to give advice on the urgency around this resolution?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I think Council need to decide that this is a procedural motion, so Council need to decide whether this is urgent or can wait for the next Council meeting. Councillors need to vote on it. Essentially, it's a procedural motion.
I'll just put it to the vote. Sorry, debate?
This is a motion, whether or not we hear it.
Yes, whether or not it's urgent. So, does anyone else wish to contribute to the debate? Councillor Baxter.
Look, I'd only make the point that it's our responsibility to make decisions that are timely, and that's not necessarily defined always by deadlines, but simply by the circumstances, the movements of other partners and stakeholders and the decisions that they make. We should make decisions to make sure that our positions are clear. And that's not necessarily based on deadlines, that's based on when people are ready to hear us.
Speakers, any further speakers? Councillor Copsey.
Just in response, I consider that it's well past time for Council to make some public comments on the governance structure, and the small amount of information that we have has been made available gives us an opportunity to put forward as a group of councillors some parameters that we consider would be useful to give that governance structure the best opportunity of success. To Councillor Pearl's point, I understood Councillor Simic's comments to be not attempting to speak for Councillor Voss, Mayor Voss, rather to say that Mayor Voss will need to express a view in conveying feedback to the state government regarding the governance structure, and that Councillor Simic considers that Council having a concluded position on this that's passed through the chambers may aid in that task, rather than to try and represent views of another councillor.
Any other speakers? Councillor Pearl?
Take that into account. I'm sure Councillor Simic is more than capable of speaking for himself about what he meant about his words. You've done the right thing. You gave me a call this afternoon and you talked me through it, and I appreciate that. I haven't been a very good councillor today in terms of my attentiveness of your motion that you emailed through earlier in the day, so I didn't get to read this until I hit the council chamber today. I did read it as soon as I sat here and considered it, and it's not what you're saying here doesn't have validity, and it definitely needs to be debated, but I don't see the sense of urgency. Having said that, we've allowed motions like this to be of less importance necessarily to be debated in the past, so I imagine this will get up. But the reason I don't support it is the Mayor sits on the MAC, and she's privy to more information than I am in terms of the governance considerations in the background. So she's a critical person that should weigh judgment on a motion such as this. And I think also when we're talking about financing, etc., which are, you're right, critically important things, this probably would be better done as a formulated response back to the state government if we had the benefit of both the Mayor's influence and also the officer's influence, particularly on the financing. We've had poor experience in the past where we go off to the state government without a fully formed position, and I don't think that consequence will happen with this necessarily, but I would like some more time to consider it. But fully respect what you've done here, Councillor Simic.
Councillor Simic, do you wish to close on the matter of urgency? Okay, I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Declare it carried. Now, let's move to the substantive motion. Councillor Simic, do you wish to... I'll take you as a mover. Yeah, I'd be happy for you to... I'll take it as read.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Is there a seconder?
Yeah, I need a seconder. Seconded, Councillor Baxter. Can I ask you to speak to the substantive aspects of your motion?
It is unfortunate that the Mayor is not here tonight. I would have also preferred for the Mayor to be here tonight and to have her input into this conversation. I would very much like to hear her point of view, but it is this motion tonight responding to an announcement that the state government made on Friday afternoon, and I had no control, and we had no control over the timing. So we're here at a point where the state government announced the governance structure for Fisherman's Bend on Friday, as we've said. And this is the first public opportunity that councillors will have to respond to the proposed structure and indeed to respond to the state government. The urgent motion strengthens our Mayor's ability to advocate on behalf of Council, her community and Council colleagues. It allows us to form an agreed position on the state government's proposal and gives all councillors an opportunity to respond on behalf of our community. It's our duty to our community to talk about Fisherman's Bend in open, transparent and public way. Fisherman's Bend is a vital project with an enormous price tag. If all of the required infrastructure is built, Council is likely to find itself in a precious financial position for many years to come. So it is essential that our community not be locked out of the decision-making process. The motion gratefully acknowledges the inclusion of Council in the State Government's Interdepartmental Committee. This is unprecedented, and I hope that it will allow for a situation where Council will be able to meaningfully contribute through its representatives. The motion notes that the new Fisherman's Bend Development Board and Mayor's panel structure is a potential opportunity, but that without robust information sharing and representative structures in place, the Council, and therefore our local community, will continue to be locked out of meaningful contribution to the planning of Fisherman's Bend, and the structure will fail. The risk is that the Mayor's Forum will be tokenistic. I think we have to be honest and open about that. This must be much more than a meeting of mayors to discuss matters informed only by personal opinions. This must be a formal and well-resourced mechanism that allows mayors and officers, reps, to impart the position of council, informed by prior guidance, if not decision, of the administration and by councillors collectively, always with a view to how council is representing its constituents. My concern, councillors, is that the structure and government's announcement makes little mention of the public. The new board and mayor's panel and all parties in Fisherman's Bend urban renewal must constantly renew their commitment to genuine community consultation and understand that ultimately all appointed persons, elected representatives or not, work for the public. Secrecy and unrepresentativeness practices will defeat this imperative. The urgent motion also makes the important point that funding and finance details have still not been released alongside the governance framework. As the motion states, the plan is essential to convey confidence that infrastructure and catalyst projects are built in a timely manner, and so that we know what Council's position and portion of the cost is. I look forward to the debate on this motion and hope that councillors agree that our views should be sent to Minister Jennings, Wynne and Foley and the Development Board Chair, Meredith Sussex, as a collective response to what has been initiated. I thank the councillors for allowing this as an urgent motion and I look forward to the debate on this.
The seconder is Councillor Baxter. Do you wish to speak?
I won't go over all the things that Councillor Simic said. I do want to say that I'm glad that we're able to debate this, and I absolutely acknowledge that Councillor Simic, and I'll be careful not to talk for another councillor here, but Councillor Simic would clearly like to bring this if this was like to bring this to a full council meeting with every councillor here. Some councillors aren't available to be here. Time is of the essence. An announcement was made recently, so it's certainly not a perfect way to bring this up, and I think Councillor Simic has acknowledged that, but it must be brought up. So I think that this is a good motion because it talks about what's happened and basically says that this could be great if we get this right. We're not entirely sure it will be gotten right, and we want to make sure that we do get it right. And we are 100% committed to working with whoever we need to work with, namely the state government, but any parts of that machine to make sure that this actually is great and that the community is represented and that we have a voice for the community in this process. So absolutely support this. I'm glad we're able to debate it. Under normal circumstances, it would have been better to bring this under the normal way to a council meeting, but time being of the essence, we're doing it now. So,
any other speakers? Oh, Councillor Bond.
I won't be supporting this just because there's just so much we don't know about what was announced last week by the state government. We were briefed this afternoon by officers, and it was quite clear in those briefings that officers don't know much of what was released last week. So I think the wisest choice of action is to wait until we are informed and then respond based on actual knowledge of what was released rather than some preemptive response just because there happens to be some information that we don't know as yet. I think it's way too early. There's no reason this can't wait to 3 weeks' time when we've had time to read and digest what it was that the state government has released and respond accordingly.
Thanks, Councillor Bond. Any further speakers? Councillor Simic, do you wish to close?
Well, thank you, councillors, for the discussion so far. I agree with the point that Councillor Bond has made, that there's very little information about how the structure will actually execute, that there's very little information, no terms of reference that have been provided for us to provide feedback on, and indeed we haven't been provided with the opportunity to provide feedback on this in any way. to this point tonight. The motion responds to what's the information that's publicly available through the press release that was sent out by the state government and other accompanying information that's been provided so far. Given the opportunity tonight is for us to respond to that, I'm not suggesting that we close off debate on this issue. Indeed, I'm urging us as a council to debate this issue, to talk about it and make sure we have an agreed position on the way forward at every opportunity possible to us.
Okay. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? Declare the motion carried. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Gross, Councillor Simic, Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Pearl, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bond. Thanks very much. 18, confidential matters. Councillors, we have no confidential items tonight. There being no further business, I declare the meeting closed at 8:30, as required by the...